What's up, world? Uko here from Better Therapy Now, and I wanted to do a video on 10 books that mean the most to me, or really my 10 top books. This is a combination of self development books, communication books, fiction novels, business books. The first book I want to talk about is Cues by Vanessa Van Edwards. She is like my Woman of the Year this year. This book on communication is the best book I've read on communication. I read Dan Carnegie's book, which was really good, How to Win Friends and Influence People. But that book doesn't get into the science-backed methods that she has. And it has a lot of general advice that made a lot of sense 80 years ago, but doesn't really apply to the social media age and the internet age and all of that stuff. This book gets really specific and it really breaks down a couple of things. So one is using your hands when you're speaking. She did a study on YouTube or TED Talk presenters, and she wanted to understand the difference between TED Talkers who went viral and people who did TED Talks and didn't go viral. And they noticed that the people who went viral used like 200 or 300 more hand gestures than the people who did not go viral. And she gives you very specific hand gestures. She talks about how those hand gestures express warmth and competence. And she makes this argument that warmth and competence are the two cues that you want to send to people that are most likely to connect you with people. Next is The 6 Types of Working Genius by Patrick Lencioni. He's written a lot of books about leadership, but this book makes the argument that there's 6 types of work that are required to get a project past the finish line. The types of working genius are like somebody who's a big picture thinker. I think they call them the wanderer. Somebody who's more creative at solving problems. Somebody that's tenacious to get a problem past the finish line. Somebody that asks a lot of questions so that you understand or you can identify gaps in things. And most likely no one person is going to fit all of these seats. So you can kind of look at your staff or look at your team and say, okay, this is what we have, and this is what we need. I think that's where this really comes into play. It helps you identify your weaknesses like in your team and gives you some sort of pathway to fill those gaps. Next is No More Mr. Nice Guy by Dr. Robert A. Glover. This book is probably more relevant now than it ever has been. He analyzes the nice guy syndrome, which is this tendency for men to suppress their needs and avoid conflict. Saying that men always want to be nice and they don't want to ruffle any feathers, and he takes issue with that. He talks about the problem of people pleasing, saying that if you're always trying to please other people, you're going to suppress your true desires. He says you should prioritize your needs, set boundaries, and embrace conflict. Be more polarizing. The next is probably my favorite book that I read last year. It's pretty old, like 20 or so years old, but The Way of the Superior Man by David Deida. It talks about men embracing their masculine essence while navigating relationships and self-improvement and just the world today. He argues that men must live with deep purpose and embrace their masculine energy, not run away from it. He likes the polarity between masculine energy and feminine energy and goes in depth about it. And he says that relationships are weakened when you try to be neutral. You should try to be masculine if you're more masculine, or try to be feminine and lean into femininity if you're more feminine. The polarity creates an attraction. Next is The Tin Drum, a freaking masterpiece. I'm pretty sure this book specifically didn't win an award, but Günter Grass won a Nobel Prize in Literature mostly for this book. So The Tin Drum is a book about a guy named Oscar and like really his entire life. And he's growing up in Germany during the rise of the Nazis. It blends magical realism, dark humor, and historical allegory. And the narrator has this really dark way of explaining everything that is so convincing. The book says a lot of deep things about Nazi Germany and the community surrounding it that allowed the Nazis to rise. If you're into World War II and magical realism, I would definitely say read this book. It's pretty long, but it's also very entertaining. There was a movie in the 1970s that is actually really good and holds up today. And I wish, out of all the literature that I've read, I wish they'd make a mini series on this book or a TV show adaptation of this book. The one that was made in the 70s, like the film technology wasn't that good. So it was good, but it would be so much better today because there's a lot of magic in the book. Like magical realism has this way of presenting magical things to you. And as a reader, you're not even sure if it's real or it's not. It's very kind of sneaky in the way that it puts in magical realism. Next book is Traction by Gino Wickman. I loved this, but I read it last year, maybe the year before. This book really explains how a business can create traction. By traction, I mean progress, like create profit for the business and get business through the door. That's what this book's all about. It's all about getting a team together, having regular meetings that are purposeful, creating a culture of accountability. He talks about personality types, specifically the visionary and the integrator. The visionary being the person that handles big relationships and really comes up with the idea of the business, the new innovative idea. And then the integrator is that person that kind of manages the team, brings ideas to life, because the visionary can come up with ideas and has a whole bunch of different ideas, but they can't really bring them to life. The integrator is the one that really kind of brings those ideas to life. And Gino Wickman talks about how those things, or those two personality types, work together. Next is another novel, 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. This book is just great. I've read it so many times. It's such an interesting book. It's got so many interesting characters. The book is about the Buendia family in the town of Macondo that they discover. It's a small, isolated town in Colombia where Gabriel Garcia Marquez is from. And it tells this multi-generational story of the Buendia family who are trapped in this cycle of solitude even when they're around other people. It's layered with all this political context and social context. It has really dynamic characters. And in the end, you see the end of the Buendia family. Next is another novel, Jennifer Egan's A Visit from the Goon Squad. It won the Pulitzer in 2011. And back then I used to look at the people that won the Pulitzer as a way to gauge what I wanted to read. And that's how I ran into this book. And this book was just for a lot of people, it was life-changing. For me, it's like one of those books that brought tears to my eyes. It's a book about families, or this group of people and a family that are in the music industry. And it talks about the music industry from different perspectives: musicians, directors, producers, people who are just related to these people. And you see how relationships and conflicts kind of intertwine. And I love the structure of the book because the way that it's told is it's like a collection of short stories. Each one of the chapters can stand on its own, but all the stories intertwine with each other. One of the central themes, and the theme that you'll feel if you read this book, is the passing of time and aging. The characters age, time passes. The different chapters, since they're broken up as short chapters, time jumps from 10, 20 years in the future, going back in the past. So you feel the passage of time. You feel how the characters age and change. And you see how they're dealing with the consequences of past decisions. The next book is Hunger by Knut Hamsun, a Norwegian author. This is just a powerful book. It follows an unnamed protagonist. Book was written in 1890 and it still holds up today. And you see mental deterioration in this character. You see emotional deterioration, and it's all layered by the character's intense hunger, because the character is basically homeless. He's like a wanderer wandering around Norway in 1890. The character is constantly dealing with their physical hunger, but they're also having a series of mental breakdowns, and there's this strong sense of isolation. There's one part that really stands out where he kind of falls in love with what I think is a prostitute. And then the ends up getting his heart broken, or he decides just not to be with her for unexplained reasons, because he's so emotionally distraught and so kind of mentally confused. And I remember the novel ending with him going to the military, or going away on a Navy ship, and really reminded me of when I was leaving for the Army and leaving Phoenix, Arizona, because back in we'd say 2010, 2011, I felt a lot like this character back then, between the ages of maybe 24 and 26. And that was exactly when I read this book. So it really reminded me oh yeah, that kind of escape and that mental deterioration and that feeling of isolation and not knowing what I wanted to do, and all that leading to me going to the military. So this book really hits home for me. And lastly is definitely my #1 book. This has been my favorite book for probably 15, 20 years, and that is The Road by Cormac McCarthy. The Road is just such a powerful book. It's about a father and his son. They're in an basically somewhere in America, but most of the people are dead. some type of tragedy has happened, but the book doesn't really explain what happened. There is no mother. There's kind of like flashbacks, like the father thinks about the mother sometimes, but you get the understanding that the mother just disappeared or ran away from them. And the father and son are dealing with like hunger. They're worried about like other humans because humans are literally kidnapping people and like eating people. Like they find a abandoned home and they go inside the home looking for food, and then they go into the basement and they find a whole bunch of people just tied up in chains. And they're like, oh my goodness, we need to get the heck out of here. Everything is dark. They can't see anything. They're always trying to like look, even in the daytime, there's so much ash in the air. That's why a lot of people think that the tragedy that happened was some giant super volcano, but there's always ash in the air and they can really not see in the daytime. And at nighttime, it's completely dark. They have to like feel their way on the ground and it's always so cold. So it's a book about survival, but the book is really about the father's love for his son and trying to protect his son at all costs. And the only thing that they're doing, the only hope that they have is going north and hoping that some type of savior or some type of like military can help them up north. The book is super powerful. It's my favorite Cormac McCarthy book. There was a time when I was doing nothing but reading Cormac McCarthy, and this remained my favorite one, even over the crazy Blood Meridian. So yeah, Cormac McCarthy, The Road. So those are my 10 books. Have you read any of these books? What did you think? Let me know in the comments below. Are there books that you wish that should be on my top 10 list that are not on there? Let me know in the comments below. Again, my name's Uko from Better Therapy Now. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.